to focus on the issues at hand. That means a civil, contextualized conversation with perspective.
They gave me some ashes. I don't know if they were his ashes or not.
There's a difference between donation and body snatching.
My commitment to Israel, as you know, is ironclad.
I think this is where the most significant change happens. And that's why what we're going through right now, and I'm going to stay with it and solve the problem.
Ronald Reagan gave us a great example when federal employees decided they were going to strike. Either you strike, you're fired. Simple concept to me.
I will ensure that this country does not have to rely on hostile nations for its energy needs ever again.
Hello, everyone. I'm Major Garrett in Washington. Welcome to America Decides. Government shutdowns do not change policy, and they damage Republicans politically. That's not my reading of contemporary shutdown history. That is the judgment of Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell, who has seen all of the GOP-fueled shutdowns, the first occurring way back in 1995. Now, we will know for sure at midnight, September 30th, if parts of the federal government are shut down and other parts forced to limp along on patchwork funding and strained staffing. Now, at this stage of a shutdown story, we would ordinarily speak in cautious but ominous tones about the possibility of a shutdown. That caution no longer applies. All visible political and legislative signals tell us a shutdown is coming. That's because the House Republican majority cannot function. That's not an editorial comment, it's a visible fact. House Republicans cannot find the votes to put a Pentagon spending bill on the House floor. The National Security Party, their words, not mine, cannot organize itself to put a bill on the floor that only its members support, because that bill contains policy priorities Democrats across Congress and inside the Biden White House vehemently oppose. Failure of this magnitude is not ordinary. When the majority party cannot bring its own hardball partisan bills to the floor, it ceases to exist as a legislative majority. Now, you might remember when Speaker Kevin McCarthy was elected after 15 strenuous, chaotic votes. Upon winning the speakership, McCarthy said, quote, "It's not how you start, it's how you finish." Finished may be the word that best applies to the functionality of the House Republican majority. It may also apply to McCarthy's speakership because of even deeper divisions within its ranks. All of this affects Congress broadly and the Biden White House. So let's bring in CBS News congressional correspondent Scott MacFarlane. Scott, catch us up on where the shutdown scenario is and the fate of the speakership of one Kevin McCarthy.
Hey, Major. Yeah, the car is getting wobbly, and the dashboard lights are on, and it feels like one of those front tires is about to pop. It's just not the normal dynamic here, and that's becoming clear over the past 24 to 48 hours. The normal rules don't seem to apply. It's not so much a standoff at this point inside the Republican House conference about budget lines, numbers, policy riders. That's traditionally what's behind these congressional standoffs. It's a much more pernicious issue that's developing. There is a disorientation and a disintegration of some of the relationships inside the House Republican Conference. It is clear, it is visceral, it is unequivocal. Relationships are fracturing. We know this after a vote failed yesterday, a very traditionally easy vote to pass failed yesterday, when different factions of the House Republican Conference came outside to the Capitol steps and give impromptu news conferences trashing each other. And we heard it today from some of the rank and file and some of the Freedom Caucus members who are questioning the leadership abilities of Speaker Kevin McCarthy. Take a listen to what Congressman Matt Gaetz of Florida, perhaps McCarthy's most vitriolic critic inside the conference, had to say to us earlier this afternoon.
I'm not asking for anything that's different or unsuspecting. I'm asking for him to comply with the deal we made. And if we're unwilling to use all the tools to force that compliance, then that doesn't just make the Speaker look unserious and the House look unserious, but make us look unserious, those of us among the House conservatives who want this place to operate in a more open and honest way.
And two dynamics worth emphasizing here, Major. First of all, Congressman Gates says there are now multiple motions to vacate circulating inside the U.S. House Republicans, which is that parliamentary technique in which they could try to call for Kevin McCarthy's job. Multiple motions are circulating. What's more, some of the moderate New York Republicans tell me they're now having conversations with Democrats about a possible third-way exit strategy. If that were to come to be, it would be a circumventing of Speaker Kevin McCarthy. He really could have his days numbered if that happens.
And let's drill down on that ever so briefly, Scott, this idea of a bipartisan coalition that ignores Speaker McCarthy's efforts to pull together House Republicans and just tries to show that, hey, here's a majority that can pass something, and that majority, if given a chance, can do that.
If you circumvent leadership, you very fundamentally show leadership either isn't necessary or might have to change. That's just one of the fundamental realities of politics. But it's also reflective of the actual reality of this legislation. They're going to need Democratic votes in some way, shape, or form. You can't get something through the Senate or get President Biden's signature without some Democratic support. So Kevin McCarthy, late today, told us when we asked that he still thinks a Republican-only bill can pass the House, give them some leverage in negotiations. But that might be the easy part. Eventually, something's got to come back to this House with Democratic names on it. Can he pass that without losing his speakership? That's why this all feels so high stakes and so disorienting with just 10 and a half days till the deadline.
And Scott, I want to quickly ask you about something that's just occurred on the Senate side, an agreement to overcome a long-standing procedural hurdle for a confirmation vote on a pending nomination for the chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff.
Yeah, Alabama Senator Tommy Tuberville has relented on some of his holds, allowing to move forward 3 key military nominations, including the chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the Marine Commandant. He's still going to persist in his hold on the dozens of other military nominations, but it gives some oxygen to the confirmation process, but also gives Tommy Tuberville another platform and megaphone to which he can make his concerns known about the Pentagon's abortion policy, allowing for time off and travel reimbursements for some service members who seek abortion services from states that don't permit them.
Scott McFarland, as always, thank you so very much. President Biden met with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in New York today. Their long-anticipated meeting comes amid protests in Israel over a planned judicial overhaul. CBS News Chief White House correspondent Nancy Cordes joins us now from New York. Nancy, what struck you about this meeting and its underlying contents?
Well, this was obviously a long-awaited meeting. In fact, Netanyahu tried to suggest months ago that he had been invited to Washington to actually sit down at the White House. That wasn't true. President Biden has made a point of not inviting Netanyahu to the White House, not extending that honor to an Israeli prime minister the way that he customarily would, because he believes that Netanyahu's cabinet, his government, his ideology has gotten too extreme. And so instead, they met on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly today. Not as grand as Netanyahu would like, but he will take it. What was also very fascinating, Major, is that typically when these meetings take place and the media is allowed in for a few moments at the top before we're ushered out and they really get down to brass tacks, normally those are pretty staid affairs. They don't make a lot of news, very boilerplate. You've been in a million of them. We call them pool sprays. But this time around, President Biden made it clear that he is not very happy with Netanyahu, and he wants to talk about it. Take a listen to what he said.
We're going to discuss some of the hard issues, and that is upholding democratic values that lie at the heart of our partnership, including checks and balances in our systems.
So I want to reassert here before you, Mr. President, that one thing is certain and one thing will never change, and that is Israel's commitment to democracy.
So you heard President Biden there saying, we're going to talk about democratic values. We're going to talk about checks and balances, because he believes, many in the Biden administration believe, that the Netanyahu government has taken this hard right turn, that they are trying to roll back the judicial system to give the executive branch more power. President Biden just came out and said it today, sitting there right next to Benjamin Netanyahu.
Nancy, I also want to play a shot from a soundbite. We call them in the trade a shot, sound over tape, but a soundbite of the Prime Minister talking about ongoing negotiations that are being somewhat shepherded by the Biden White House with Saudi Arabia about full recognition and a sort of peace arrangement. Let's listen to what the Prime Minister said, and then the question to you is the White House as optimistic as Netanyahu sounds? Let's listen.
I think that under your leadership, Mr. President, we can forge a historic peace between Israel and Saudi Arabia. And I think such a peace would go a long way, first, to advance the end of the Arab-Israeli conflict, achieve reconciliation between the Islamic world and the Jewish state, and advance a genuine peace between Israel and the Palestinians.
All that, Nancy, is that possible?
It is possible, the White House says, but only if the Israeli government returns to the idea of a two-state solution. If they don't continue to build settlements in what would typically be assumed to be Palestinian territory, if they don't pull back on a crackdown against Palestinian people. If that all continues, the president himself has argued, then Saudi Arabia is unlikely to want that deal, want to normalize relations with Israel. And this is a big piece of leverage the White House has, because Israel would, as you heard the Prime Minister Netanyahu say, they really want to normalize those relations. First of all, because it gives them an extra buffer between Israel and Iran. They're very concerned about Iran and its expanding nuclear program. Obviously, Saudi Arabia, economically, militarily, is the biggest player in the neighborhood. And so from a security and safety perspective, Israel would very much like to normalize that relationship. But Saudi Arabia, the White House argues, is simply not going to play ball unless Netanyahu moves as well on Israeli-Palestinian relations.
Many potential possible positive outcomes there, but a long way away. Nancy Cordes in New York, thanks so very much.
You're welcome.
The White House is no longer sending officials to Detroit to assist in the UAW strike negotiations. One man who will be there next week, well, that's former President Trump. A look at the possible political ramifications unfolding near and on the picket lines. You are streaming America Decides.
If it's important to our nation,
I wonder how you think about where America is at this moment.
it's on Face the Nation.
Can there be stability if Vladimir Putin remains in power?
Face the Nation with Margaret Brennan on CBS.
America Decides, taking you inside American democracy.
The most important stories on a day-to-day, hour-to-hour basis.
You're going to hear a lot of reporting.
It is clearly a pivotal moment.
Gun control, the economy, education. Both sides of the political aisle fight it out for power.
Bringing you the analysis that you need.
Thoughtfully, with context.
Be part of the conversation.
On CBS News Streaming.
Welcome to America Decides.
An original documentary from CBS reports.
I always tell people that Twitter would not be Twitter without Black Twitter. It's just us being in fellowship with each other.
And it becomes a conversation you don't want to be left out of.
People really started to recognize the power of activism on Twitter.
Based on that one tweet, the hashtag #OscarSoWhite was trending around the world.
If anything has really powered Black Twitter, it's been humor.
If your food ain't right, oh, we're going to tell you about that, too.
We tend to create change, create culture and cool.
That's how movements happen on Black Twitter and go beyond more than that.
Black Twitter, the Twitterverse that changed a generation. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
When weather turns extreme,
the threat of severe weather and dangerous tornadoes is expected to last.
CBS News and the Weather Channel bring you virtual weather technology so advanced, so real.
Let's bring in our partners at the Weather Channel.
Now 6 feet of water, imagine that. Cars that can act like battering rams.
These hyper-realistic simulations show you what the weather will look and feel like before it happens.
Feel the forecast, streaming on CBS News.
An original documentary from CBS reports.
The carnage in our nation's schools has become painfully repetitive.
Not one more child
School shootings have parents fighting mad.
I promised my daughter I was going to fight. It's going to keep on happening.
And teachers taking lessons in how to fight back.
This is an exercise.
We approach it as it's you or them.
It shouldn't have to be your teacher's job to protect your life.
But will the battle over gun control,
People are afraid that they're going to lose their gun rights altogether,
be the hardest lesson of all?
The exercise, you're having to shoot at an adult. Are you prepared to have to kill one of your students?
Guns in the Classroom, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
She's the most successful alpine skier, male or female, ever, and a worldwide inspiration.
We need a lot of women doing sports really, really well.
The story of Michaela Schifrin's game-changing reign at the top of the slopes when we go person to person.
Welcome back to America Decides. The United Auto Workers Union strike is now in its 6th day. At present, there are no signs of a breakthrough. The union's president is threatening to expand the strike unless serious progress is made by noon Friday. The White House originally planned to send 2 top administration officials to Detroit to assist in the negotiations, but that is all now on hold. CBS News Chief Election and Campaign Correspondent Robert Costa joins us now. Robert, this has become a little ticklish for the White House in ways I don't think the White House initially expected. When the president gave his remarks Friday, which we covered in a special report here at CBS News, he said record profits should result in a record contract, but he also added parenthetically, I'm going to send 2 administration officials there to help out, thinking that was just sort of what you might do in a circumstance like this. Then word came to the White House. The UAW said, what are you talking about? That looks to us like you're trying to put the thumb on the scale for the auto companies, not us. And now there's talk, well, should the president get on the picket line and do all this other demonstrative stuff? The politics have gotten suddenly tricky.
And they're especially tricky for President Joe Biden, who, going back to his election to the Senate in 1972, has had such a link with labor in this country. That has been the backbone of his political
Calls
career.
himself the most pro-labor president in American history.
And most of his political rallies, they're populated by members of the labor movement. And so he wants to make sure in the place like the industrial heartland of the country that those workers who are out on the picket line or supportive of those out on the picket line remain in the Biden camp because we're in election season.
Right. Let's take a look at some numbers I pulled together from the U.S. Census Bureau on union membership in some key electoral vote-rich states. Let's look at Michigan. 14% now. Back in 1989, it was 29%. You can look at the contrast. Pennsylvania, 12.7%. Wisconsin, 7.1%. That's 44 electoral votes there. You had Ohio, 12.8%, all down from 1989, but still important. Now, not all of those union members are obviously auto workers, but they might be generally sympathetic. That's something that the president's got to pay attention to.
And he is paying attention to it. And by talking about having his officials go to Michigan, that's a sign that he wants to have fingerprints over the decision here, over the negotiation. And the
ultimate deal, because we know there's going to be a deal. We just don't know when. And then hovering around all of this, former President Trump. What's the angle there?
Based on our conversations with Trump associates and advisors, they expect Trump to go to Michigan, to Detroit, next Wednesday at the same time of the Republican primary debate in Simi Valley, California at the Ronald Reagan Presidential Library. This is Trump's efforts to try to compete with President Biden to make this about a general election dynamic, not a primary dynamic at this stage in the race.
And the former president has said some things that don't stand up to economic scrutiny, but they might work politically in the sense that one of the issues for the strike is the transition from electric vehicles, from combustion engine vehicles to electric vehicles. Fewer people are required on the assembly lines to build electric vehicles. Trump says, we're not going to even make any of these. China's going to make all of them in 3 years. You're not going to have any jobs. Well, the fact is, more people are buying electric vehicles now than did a year ago. The trend lines there are continuing. Those jobs aren't going to disappear. But that doesn't really matter, it seems, in the former president's rhetoric. What he wants to say is something bad might happen to you, and I'm the one who can protect you from it.
And that's a typical Trump approach. The complicated politics on the right side of the country are really intriguing to watch because there's an aversion to any kind of climate-friendly policy when it comes to automobiles and manufacturing among many Republicans. At the same time, one of their heroes now on the right is Elon Musk, and who runs Tesla.
Tesla, right.
And electric cars are part of this social media company, at least in a tangential way, X, that has been a real place for Republicans to have a gathering place.
And part of the competition that Ford, Stellantis, and General Motors have to be aware of, because Tesla's non-union and they're in the EV market and they're going to stay there. And that's a growing part of the U.S. auto market.
It's going to be fascinating to watch what Trump says exactly about the strike. Does he just make overtures to workers generally and talk about foreign policy in China in the context of economic policy in the Midwest? Or does he really take a position next Wednesday that makes news alongside the Republican debate?
And Robert, what does it mean to you that that choice is more important than being at the second debate?
For Trump, being at the second debate would be a sign of weakness. Talking to those who know him well, they say he just does not want to elevate the field by having himself on stage. Now, Trump's rivals would contest that characterization of Trump's appearance. They think he's being cowardly. Christie has said that, the former New Jersey governor, by not being there. But Trump believes if he was there, he'd bring a spotlight not only onto him, but onto others there. He wants to keep them politically suffocated as long as possible.
One last thing very quickly on the White House side of this. I've talked to people at the White House who say, look, Trump can wade into this all he wants. He has a terrible worker protection record. The manufacturing record isn't all that solid. We look out for workers, and our record reflects it. They seem to want to wade into a little bit of this if Trump gets deeper into it.
And it's probably politically necessary, because when I think back to 2016 and going across Pennsylvania, I drove across Pennsylvania, drove across Wisconsin and Ohio. Even those diehard labor Democrats sometimes heard the song of Trump's rhetoric, whether it was on cultural issues or just grievances on different fronts, and they identified with it. In particular, the messaging Trump has had on China for years, and that is always a threat to a Democrat like President Biden, who believes, yes, labor is organized for them, but they know when they get into that ballot booth that they could go the other way.
And the Democratic regret after 2016 was sleeping on that and not being aggressive there. Robert Costa, always a great pleasure to talk to you. The Defense Department is launching a new initiative to correct the military records of service members discharged because of their sexual orientation during Don't Ask, Don't Tell. Now, that policy effectively banned members of the LGBTQ+ community from openly serving in the military. Troops who were removed from service under that policy weren't given an honorable discharge. During a 9-month investigation, CBS News found that those without an honorable discharge might not have gained full access to their veterans' benefits. Here's Deputy Defense Secretary Kathleen Hicks on the Pentagon's efforts.
We know the task remains unfinished. More work remains to reach every veteran whose life was impacted by Don't Ask, Don't Tell. This outreach campaign will be online, by email, by mail, through nonprofits and veteran service organizations, and more. It starts today with a new online resource on defense.gov.
This announcement comes on the 12th anniversary of the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. Ron DeSantis took his 2024 campaign to Texas to unveil his energy plan. More on that when we return. You're streaming America Decides.
An original documentary from CBS reports. Controversial Congressman George Santos.
Why won't you answer our questions?
How did he manage to get elected?
Thank you very much, and God bless you, and God bless the USA.
George Santos' campaign was a campaign of deceit, lies, and fabrication.
And who is he, really?
I knew him as Anthony DeVolder from Queens.
Really, who he is, he's a fraud.
I compare him to the Tinder swindler.
From people who know him, the truth, the facts, the lies.
He would say that he was worth $100 million.
It's an incredibly cynical episode in American politics, beyond satire.
Had you ever seen anything like this?
No, and I hope I never see it again.
Campaign of Deceit, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
She dazzled on the court and off the court as a businesswoman.
Thank you for joining us on Person to Person. Tennis superstar and entrepreneur Serena Williams.
An original CBS Reports documentary.
I asked my students, what are we going to do about racism in the United States?
The backlash over teaching about racism in American schools.
I don't think it has any place in the classroom.
We can either pretend and say, no, we're not racist and we're all great people, or we can actually start to do the really, really hard work of addressing it.
How did you lose your job? I made the statement that white privilege is a fact.
Is it helping diversity and inclusion?
When you bring in different people's stories and experience, it enriches education.
If you don't talk about something, it doesn't go away.
Or driving us further apart?
What schools are doing to our children in the name of anti-racism is in fact teaching them racism.
The intention is to put us in this war against each other.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now. An original CBS Reports documentary.
I was entitled to equal pay for equal work under the law.
Does the Supreme Court's power need to be checked?
9 Supreme Court justices, 5 of them said no, she's not entitled. That's not right.
Calls to fix the court tend to go along with the politics of the moment.
Republican-appointed justices have all tended to go in one direction, with the Democratic-appointed justices tending to go in another.
Even though it's only 9 justices, it takes 5 of them to make the law of the land.
Does it have political impact? True. Political intent? Probably not true.
If the American people don't trust the judgment of their court, that's a real problem for our democracy.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now.
On our places, bright shiny faces.
When you wake up in the morning, we want to be your go-to team.
I don't go to work in the morning. I go for coffee with my 2 good friends, and we talk about the world.
Night lights territory, so I know we've got football season going on now. I'm running for president because our nation is in decline. I don't think that this decline is inevitable. I think it's a choice that we as Americans get to make about the right way forward.
Welcome back to America Decides. That was Florida Governor Ron DeSantis in Midland, Texas, today describing his energy agenda. He says it will, quote, unleash American energy dominance.
As president, I will restore America's energy independence. We will use our energy dominance to deny our enemies revenue. We will bankrupt their ability to threaten America, and we will help our allies become less reliant on our adversaries.
CBS News political reporter Aaron Navarro joins us from the aforementioned Midland, Texas. Aaron outlined what the governor said he would do that is noticeably different from what the Biden administration is doing.
Major, good to be with you. I was at this oil rig where DeSantis was holding his event a couple blocks from here in Midland. And essentially, as you said, he wants to, quote, unleash domestic energy production, specifically for fossil fuels, oil, coal, natural gas, as well as nuclear power. And he argues that that is the most efficient way to strengthen the security grid. And he wants to accomplish that mainly by eliminating a lot of federal regulations President Biden has put in place, whether that be preservation of lands that minerals are in or the Keystone XL pipeline. Take a listen to what he said about climate change, though, when asked about it today.
When Joe Biden says that he's more worried, like in 10 years, with the climate than a nuclear war, I mean, I'm sorry, that's just not true. We don't want nuclear war. Trust me, that is not going to be a good thing. That devastation would be incalculable. And so I think that it would be better if people, who were concerned were a little more realistic.
Now, it's interesting because DeSantis, coming from Florida, a state that has seen a lot of powerful hurricanes in the recent decade, he acknowledged when asked about climate change that there clearly is a change in the climate. He mentioned how Florida does rely on solar power, but he seems to be taking a really anti-climate change stance or kind of downplaying the effects of it here.
Aaron, while you were there, you also had a chance to talk to some voters about the 2024 Republican field. What did they tell you?
Now, this is the one constant I've been getting from DeSantis events on the trail. These are people that are interested in him, interested in what he did on COVID in Florida, but leave the event still feeling undecided, still looking at other options for their vote for president. Take a listen to what some voters in Texas told me.
I'm glad that there are so many, we have candidates such as
such as Governor DeSantis, who's a strong conservative, and I love what he's done in Florida, and I love the way that he handled the whole COVID situation out there. We have Tim Scott, and we have Ramaswamy, and right now it's still early.
I like President Trump. I supported President Trump in the last elections, and I thought he made a very good president for us. I also like Governor DeSantis very well, and I think either one of them would do well to run our country.
Now, as his team would tell you, and strategists looking at this race, it is early, but the two-man argument that DeSantis is making does seem to be a bit in flux when you have polls showing him at 4th or 5th or tied on 2nd with a lot of other candidates, and you hear from voters kind of matching what those polls are telling you.
Voters are shopping, but at DeSantis events, to your experience, Aaron Navarro, not quite sold. Aaron Navarro in Midland, Texas. Thanks so very much. That does it for today. We thank you very much for watching. You are streaming CBS News.
It's a history-making meeting. 4 extraordinary women who are all 4-star generals and admirals.
How did you deal with being discriminated